All right, so I am happy to welcome everyone to this event today. My name is Jay Jones, and I'm the Interim Associate Dean at the School of Health Sciences, Human Services, and Nursing here at Lehman. We're also called HS2N. I'd like to welcome you all to what is essentially a final reading of this discussion group. We've had a series of readings that have been held over the last year that have been coordinated by the Cuny Institute for Health Equity with the support of a Humanities New York Reading and Discussion Group grant. We've been able to facilitate discussions about 3 texts so far. In Defense of Food by Michael Pollan, Food Politics by Marian Nessel, and The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. This session had to be rescheduled because of the, and is virtual because of the pandemic, but we're very glad to be here. Our discussion today is going to focus on and be informed by The Third Plate, which is written by Chef Dan Barber. Like the other books I mentioned, it is a selection from The Serious Side of Food, a Humanities New York reading list that, to use their words, exposes some of the issues that lie on our plates. We're very grateful for the support of Humanities New York, which encourages critical thinking and cultural understanding in the public arena through grants, programs, networking, and advocacy. And you can visit them at, humanitiesnewyork.org to learn more. We're also appreciative of the support of Steve Castellano in our IT department, Alonzo Robertson in Media Relations, and the HS2N Dean's Office, which is led by Dean El Gloria Harrison. I'd like to note that we'll be recording this event. You should feel free to use the chat throughout for any questions, and we will definitely have a period where you can ask questions as well. Our conversation today will be moderated by Craig Rothman, who is a college laboratory technician and an instructor in the Dietetics, Foods, and Nutrition program here at Lehman. We'll start, however, with a few words from Dr. Maria Isabel Roldos, who is the director of the Cuny Institute for Health Equity. Dr. Roldos.
Hello to everybody. I'm very honored, and we've been looking forward for this event for a couple of weeks now. I should disclose that I had recently joined Cuny and Lehman in the last month and a half. A little bit about my background. I come from NIH. I was at the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities for a couple of years. And before that, I was in different academic institutions, as well as in CDC. So I hope that I bring a perspective to Lehman and Cuny that is focused not only on policy priorities related to health, but as well as bringing a strong scholarship related to minority health and health disparities. So I am, as Dr. Jones mentioned, I was hired, and I'm leading currently the Cuny's Institute for Health Equity. So we're going through a strategic plan process that is going to, it's going to be launched very soon, and it's going to be a visioning process that includes many steps including having community engagement, some listening sessions, as well as virtual town halls, talks with the faculty, with the staff, and hopefully we can come up with a structure for the Institute that not only promotes scholarship in terms of minority health and health disparities, but as well as create strong partnerships and equal partnerships with community partners. So this event in particular, which thank you, Dr. Jones, for your leadership in this series of events, that hopefully is the start for me for new webinar and conference series that are going to be sponsored by the Institute. I do want to kind of have a few words, since I have related to the general context of this book. And I think that I want to leave one thought as we move forward in the discussion that have to do with the social determinants of health. I think that the book per se has many, many highlights of why there's issues about food insecurity with vulnerable populations, the populations that experience health disparities. But I also want to bring into the discussion the importance of an understanding the social determinants, not only for health, but the social determinants in different types of outcomes that are that we are interested. We are interested in health because we are in the School of Health Sciences. And in this book, there's many things that are aligned with social determinants and many that are not, which actually may result in different health outcomes, and especially will result in differences and big gaps of health outcomes between different populations. And really what I'm trying to say here, going around the bush, is that many behaviorals that are considered to be healthier, or that are associated with better health outcomes, may or not be available for those that actually have poor outcomes. And it's not the result of their making a rational choice of having a bad behavior, or having the lifestyle that was linked to a health outcome. That is really the result of a social determinant that enables them or creates a barrier or a disincentive to have that behavior towards having a more healthy life. So that being said, I don't want to take the whole time. I want to congratulate and thank Greg. I thank you, Dr. Jones, for all the thank yous to the staff and our colleagues that helped us support this event. And I look forward to all the discussions and what's going to come out of this event. Thank you so much.
All right, Craig, please lead us into a discussion.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks for having me and inviting me to speak about this book and speak with everyone about it and have a conversation. And thanks to you, Dr. Roldos, for allowing me to do that, and to the Institute of Health Equity. And to tie everything back to health is really, it should be the goal of what we're doing, using food, as our lens, and the work of Dan Barber to do that. And I think it's possible to do it. It might not be right on the surface of the book, and you might have to extrapolate and use the work as a way to think, outside the box a little bit on how it relates back to our health. Chef Barber does make some. He does relate some of the things that he speaks about in the themes to health specifically, and we'll get into that. And so my name is Craig Rothman again, and it's a privilege to be here and to speak to you guys today. And I work in the foods laboratory at Lehman College, in the dietetics, foods, and nutrition program at Lehman, and I work with students that are going on to become registered dietitians or work in food service, and we cover everything from food science to how cultural elements of cuisine, preparing foods, discussing sustainability, the environment, where our foods come from. So a lot of the things that Dan Barber talks about in the book, and that is his life's work, I often deal with, and there are things that are close to me, close to home, and I think about all the time. And so the nature of these discussions usually is a back and forth. It's usually me getting out of the way and putting the work up front, and allowing you all to respond to the work, and to share how you process things and the meaning you take away from what's in the material. And so, being that this is a whole new world that we're dealing with, and a lot of the things in the book, don't have the urgency that that they might have before this new environment that we're interfacing with now. I'm going to give excerpts as I go through the presentation. I'm going to give excerpts from the book that I think are impactful, that we can respond to, that we could all, if we haven't read the book, we could respond to in the moment, and from whatever field or interest you have across the health spectrum, your own personal response to the way you eat, to the way you feel about food and the environment, because those are, two intertwining features of this work. Please share. You could use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and I'll try to catch that if I can, or I'll get some help doing that, or just like chime in. And that can be at any part of the discussion. Just jump in if you have something to share, because it's really about how we all are, how we digest the material, no pun intended. And so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now, and we can jump into this. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
So it'd be a little hard to talk about it, pretty much anything right now, without addressing the elephant in the room, which is the pandemic that we're all immersed in, no matter who we are, where we are. It's just impossible to avoid. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to tie in and segue into Dan Barber's, how he's responded to it, because that's out there. Public information is one of the benefits of the world of technology that we're in. That is so much information, maybe a little bit too much. So we'll try to take small bites. It's impossible also to avoid food puns because they're just everywhere. So in the third plate, and you'll see in one of the quotes, Dan Barber's a chef. He grew up helping his grandmother on her farm in the Berkshires. And so at a very early age, he was in the agricultural world. It surrounded him and had a big effect on him. He quotes he's a chef. He runs a restaurant, two restaurants, one in the city and one at Stone Barns, which is a educational farm that's supported by the Rockefeller Foundation very intimately.
Craig, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you make your screen a little larger for people? The screen share, it's kind of small. If you can increase the size.
Oh, not sure I can. These are small images. Jay, are these small images?
Yes, I think it was Claudette indicated that it was kind of small.
It's really the first one that is small. The others are pretty.
Okay.
Let me give you one. How is this? Can you read this?
Yes.
Well, that looks clear.
Yes.
Because that's the bulk of it. That's the
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So, so Dan Barber's a chef, and he grew up on a farm, and he runs a restaurant. The farm is designed, and I'll show you in his words what the Rockefeller Foundation was attempting to do with Stone Barns, but it's to shorten the food supply chain. The farm to table movement is really the essence that was the driving force behind it. And you'll see in the book was Dan Barber was prompted by the Rockefeller Foundation and Stone Barns to explore the food system. And whatever you might think about the chef, and the sense of authority the chef has, the self-importance, maybe some people might say, and Dan Barber was featured in the Chef's Table in the first season, so you can see he's a person who's got a lot of confidence, is one way to put it. He in this book, he's very humble, and he's on a search, and the third table is a plate that's designed, a way of eating that's designed to create a sustainable food system that will protect our environment and our health. And it begins with the American style of eating, which is a big hunk of protein in your plate, on your plate. So that would be the first plate. Big hunk of protein that's been delivered by our industrial agricultural system. We were very proud of this at one point, and minds are changing, but we were very proud of this at one point, our ability to manipulate nature, to drive yields, to feed the world essentially. And yield was the way that we measured success, feeding people. And it does feed people. So that's one thing. You can have many arguments why it's bad, and we'll get into those. But the one thing it does is feed people. 3 billion people are dependent on the industrial agricultural system as it stands. So shifting the way we eat is a challenge. And so that's the thrust of Chef Barber's work. He is a graduate of what used to be the French Culinary Institute in Manhattan, which became the International Culinary Center, which has been subsumed by the International International Center for Culinary Education. So there's a lot of flux in the story in where Chef Barber is coming from. And so that's part of the story is there's a lot of flux, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of reevaluation. And that's one of the things that a reader of this book is assumed to be a person who is willing to reevaluate maybe things that they took for granted or they didn't pay attention to. It's to have a closer reading of how you sustain yourself via the food system, which is, he quotes Wendell Berry in the book, it's an agricultural act, the act of eating. And I would say it's much more than that now. It's an act of ethics. It's a political act. And the old saw by Jean-Antel Briot-Savarin that any food studies scholar will quote you is, tell me what you eat and I'll tell you what you are. So I think it's hard to avoid that. Eating is an act of self-expression, and you're saying something, maybe not even thinking about it, but you are communicating something to the world. So hopefully, if people want to share their eating habits, and if they're changing, if you're reevaluating, there's hopefully an opportunity for us to speak about that. But I wanted to talk about the coronavirus really briefly and what's going on with the food system, just like really quick, just so we cover that, and we're not going to ignore that. It's just impossible to do. And the food system and the coronavirus are connected. There is a connection. Coronavirus came out of human encroachment into natural habitats, and there's a lot of ways that we are crossing over boundaries where there's a spillover effect to these new viruses. And so here's an article about that. And farming is a human activity that unleashes potential health. So when we speak about health, yes, chronic diseases are part of that. Our access to healthcare and to nourishing foods and nutrition and all kinds of lifestyle factors, that is part of it. But when you're threatened by a life and death pandemic, I think we need to begin there and make sure that we're protecting ourselves against this pandemic and the next one, because unfortunately there's more coming. And if you read this book or even bits of this book, you'll see that coronavirus is unfortunately the tip of the iceberg. And as we continue to, population grows, we cross over boundaries, we engage in a conventional agricultural and industrial method of farming, commodifying foods and animals. There's more coming unless there's radical changes, outbreaks. And this is a quote, Larry Brilliant said, outbreaks are inevitable, pandemics are avoidable. So the more that we communicate about this, the more we can secure ourselves and our health going forward, and then really dive deeper into disparities and chronic diseases and how food is part of that conversation as well. But the pandemic thing, I think we need to look at it square in the face and understand that the farming system and agricultural farming and the way we eat is a major driver of this, especially with livestock. These novel viruses they're not happening just in human populations. These are coming, 3/4 of these new viruses, novel viruses, are coming out of animal populations and are jumping from wild animal to domesticated animal, especially in the way we keep our animals and use them as commodities and how we consume them. So that's just an unavoidable part of this discussion. And here's how COVID-19 has had a major impact on the food system at all levels, from agriculture down to the restaurant world. And the restaurant world is essentially where Dan Barber is going to make his impact. And we'll get more into that when we look at some of the excerpts of the book. But the meatpacking workers on the front line, they're feeding us. So just like healthcare, people in the food system are also, a lot of times they have no choice, are out there in the trenches, and the food supply chain is right there, face to face with this pandemic. And you see just and I'm sure a lot of us have seen the impact in this area. Food insecurity has doubled since coronavirus. So it's kind of hard to talk about a third plate and a way of eating without, understanding what so many of us are dealing with. And people who don't have an option of what they're going to eat, they have to be nourished, and they have to take kind of what is on offer. And this situation has drastically increased food insecurity by double. And the farm to table movement that fuels Dan Barber's work at Stone Barns and in Blue Hill, that has kind of been totally destabilized. And you see the USDA, and even the fact that we're able to produce so much food, there's so much food waste going on at the same time. There's a lot of dysfunction and derangement in our food system, which the book totally covers. But now we're really seeing it it's hard you can't ignore it. It's not just something you could turn away from anymore. And so what's the government doing? Billions of dollars are getting pumped into the agricultural system right now. CFAP is the plan, and there's another plan that's on deck that they're negotiating right now, but already $32 billion has been pumped into the agricultural system to protect what we have. Whether or not that's going to be a continuation of the poor practices that are going on now that we need to reevaluate, it's something that we all need to pay attention to and hopefully have an impact on and support politicians that care about this. And Dan Barber was a part of that during the last administration, which I'll briefly touch on. And the restaurant industry has really taken a huge hit. Thousands of businesses have been lost. Restaurants, I don't know how you feel about them. I mean, that's one of the bedrocks of this book, is that you care about restaurants. And there's been reporting that Americans spend more money in the restaurant world than on groceries. And it's not an apples to apples comparison. Obviously, there's different amounts of money being spent in different arenas. But it is something to think about, that restaurants feed people, and not just the high cuisine restaurants, all the ones in the middle, all the local small places, and they're taking a huge hit right now. And so there's a bill that's being negotiated hopefully that'll get passed to protect the restaurant industry, $120 billion, towards just sustaining what's going on right now amidst this unprecedented environmental pandemic. And so Dan Barber is not immune to any of this. It's changed his approach to what he's doing at Blue Hill and Stone Barns, and he's taking a step back. And I would invite you to read this article in Eater. But the political tensions and unrest that's been also unleashed during this time, Dan Barber is confronting that on one end, bringing in other different people into the food world, into the restaurant world, into having a place in preparing our foods and determining what we're eating. So he's taking a step back right now at his restaurant and allowing guest chefs to come in, female guest chefs, minority guest chefs, because political forces are also being unleashed. It's a confluence of things going on right now in the midst of this pandemic, caused by it, as another effect of it, that it's just hard to ignore. And our author is right in the midst of it, and he's trying to save small farms while this is all going on. And if you look at the USDA, you'll see how complex the application is, and what areas of the food system all of those billions of dollars are going towards. And so we can get into the book now. We can start talking a little bit about that, because there is a intertwining of what we eat, how it affects the environment, and how it affects our health. And he didn't predict a pandemic, a viral unleashing, that the book that I referred to at first did. Foodborne illnesses are what he sees occurring in the food system that we had, and malnutrition, so the chronic diseases. But the destruction of the environment and the turning upside down in the ecology is something that is covered deeply in this book. And so I just would put it out there. I wonder if anyone makes any connection between what they eat and the environment around them, because it's not always apparent. Sometimes you're hungry and you're not thinking that deeply about what you're doing and what you're eating. So if anyone wants to comment about their food habits, and how they might be changing, or how they connect what they're doing, their food, their activity of eating, and the environment, that would be something that I would welcome to hear about. And you could share if you want, and you can read this. This is from Third Plate.
And Craig, I'll partake in your question.
Please.
So since we're finishing up our sustainability rotation with the interns, we've had a lot of discussions about food and sustainability in all the food sectors, from production to waste management. So in terms of something that has come out of COVID, at least for myself, and maybe I could speak for some of the interns, is a bigger focus on reducing food waste. Whatever we do buy, considering it seems like more of us are cooking meals at home, not going outside, that we're more conscientious of what we have in the fridge and the freezer, and making sure that less of it goes in the garbage. And there's also compost that's come up a lot. And I noticed that Grow NYC and Zero Food Waste, they've set up their food scraps after them being closed for many months due to COVID. So that's something that we may have a little bit more control over.
Yeah, and that's those are great points. There used to be like a major thing that Dan Barber concentrated on. He had a pop-up called Wasted in the city, using stuff like chickpea water, which is aquafaba, it's called, and it's, you can whip it into a cream. But he was doing a lot of things with waste, and I think Jamie Oliver. So the chef is an activist in having an impact on our food system. Yes, those are major things, and the amount of waste in this country is amazing. And you could see it now with the pandemic. All the food's being dumped back into the ground because the food supply chain has been disrupted. Those are great points, and that is a way that the pandemic is having a direct effect and causing us to think about it even further. And it was the opposite before. The USDA has been studying food outside of the home. That was like a topic that they really covered, how more people eat outside the home than inside the home. But now that's reversed almost again, back to the way maybe it used to be. So yeah, it's interesting the way things are going back and forth, and it forces us to reevaluate. So thank you for sharing that.
Hi, Craig.
Hi, Chantal.
Hi. Yes, it's Chantal. Hi, Professor Stupler and Professor Dina. It's great to see you guys. But adding on to what you're saying, and to what Professor Stupler was saying, me personally, for sure, because of the coronavirus, I had to adapt to a lot of things. One of the simplest way was changing the way that I approach food. So especially with one of the recent workshops that I attended with Professor Stupler, her interns showed this kind of like preparing for the night and then just eating it in the morning. It was chia oats, and it was just so simple. And I was just like, oh, I should continue eating like this since I'm really busy usually in the mornings. I'm always attending Zoom meetings, but it's a great way to prepare one for the next day, and then just to be aware of what's in your fridge. So like, let's say if there's some spinach that I know it's gonna get bad, or kale that, it has maybe a day or two left, I should just throw it in the smoothie and it'll be good to eat, healthier for me, and obviously it allows me to be more conscious of the food that I have. Also, adding on to what you're saying, definitely me and a coworker of mine, we were discussing about how we're slowly planting, and I believe I talked to you about this as well. I started to grow herbs, which is really exciting. So I'll be able to put that in a little bit of the food that we have, even drinks. So for my little brother, I'm slowly exposing him more to food just so he can be aware of what he's consuming. Because right now he's a little bit on the overweight side, but he's young. So I'm like, it's okay, you still have time to grow. And then I'm educating more on, what are things he should consume, and then what are things that maybe he should avoid. Another book that I've been rereading is How Not to Die. So I'm just like, it sounds a little intimidating. I was like, it's a really great book. And I like kind of break it down for him. He's a high schooler, so he's not going to read it. So I just kind of make it easier for him. But like everything you're saying is it's great.
Yeah. And I want to thank Chantal for being part of that teaching kitchen that we had this past Friday, where she got that great. So we've been hosting virtual teaching kitchens with budget-friendly, sustainable recipes. Yeah. So it was good.
Thanks, Chantal. Hey,
I just wanted to add Caroline Davis, adjunct in HSA class. But I think it's really important that this time has allowed us to see how important it is to also schedule time to do such things, as Chantal said, as food prep, right? We take time with studying, we take time with family and friends, hopefully, right? We take time in our careers, but really taking that time to really invest in what it means to have a healthy meal, and what importance that brings to just life, right? Many times we surround ourselves in company with food, and the fact that we've done that so much outside, especially in New York City, and now we're forced to do it inside, has definitely brought enlightenment, and how we just, have a relationship with food, sort of. So definitely, I totally agree with what was already said, but just looking at the importance of investing time in what we eat and making sure that that's part of the schedule as well.
thank you. Thanks everyone for sharing it. And going back to Chantal, you mentioned chia and you mentioned oats, and I have a feeling that those are food types. Those are crops that are hardy. They grow well. They're not so energy extractive from the environment. They're really nutritious for human consumption, and they can be turned into such culinary sustainable foods. So I'm glad that you brought those two up, because oats and chia, I mean, these are things, I mean, the chia pet, something that we kind of dismissed years ago, and now it's become part of our, a reevaluation of what we're eating and the nutritious content of things. And you also mentioned how you're connecting that with family. And this is another theme in the book, the communal element of food and growing food. And there's a discussion of wheat in the book, and how it used to be this whole community effort. There would be the farmer growing and giving it to the miller, who gave it to the baker. So you and your brother, you're kind of on a small scale, kind of bringing back an old way of doing things, of coming together. And Caroline, what you mentioned about just slowing things down a little bit, the slow food movement, and food has become a convenience in a lot of ways. It's just getting food into us as quick as possible. And it used to be life. It used to be, 90% of us were farmers in these small family farms. And it used to be like an integral element of society that's been kind of pried apart as we move into the modern era. And that's another theme in the book. So slowing things down and, putting importance on food, and not just something that we do while we're in our car or on our way somewhere. It's something that we settle into and we think about and we share with each other. So this is, I think Chef Barber would say, a way to develop, get back to the roots before, the industrial, agricultural, fast pace, everyone kind of working themselves to death system, and understanding what's important. So those are great points. And this book it gets into things like that. Maybe not in the same way, but you'd be influenced, and you'd find connections between what's in the book and what you're saying right now. It's there. And
if I may,
yes.
I agree. I think that, again, I'm not in from the nutritional world, but I do think, if I may kind of, elevate the discussion to a different level, I think that it's also important to think about equity, right? And that probably for the majority of the population, those are luxuries that are just not available. They're just not in the purview of what is possible for themselves as well as for their families. And I do think that is important, as these things become more trendy, that this, and I use it with trendy not in a negative way. I use it in the way that, we're trying to adapt and listen to different perspectives as we change the behaviors of the way that we live, that it doesn't affect everyone, and that probably all of us, including myself, want that. We strive for it, but many can't. They just can't. And that we look at these type of trends with a social ecological perspective, and knowing that there's an intersection between individuals, families, communities, society. So you can say, this will be great, but maybe there may be societal barriers that prevent those populations or their groups to behave that way. There's maybe community barriers or disincentives. So as we think about this, I think that it's important that we don't focus only on the individual behavior of the individual who may or may not have the time to do what you were just describing, but that there's many other things that are intersecting, and how the person thinks about food or thinks about the way that they influence their family. It's not necessarily a choice of the decision. So there's many research, and I'll just mention one, that has to do with, that looks at neighborhoods and say, disadvantaged neighborhood, underserved neighborhood, to say how often or how many feet or how many stores are there where there's fresh food, and where maybe they're not available, or maybe there's issue about crime, and and people just can't make it to the store as often as we would need to get fresh food. So they have to. So these are things that are not minor. They're actually the day in, the day out of many families in many communities in the U.S., where they say, I go to the store every 2 weeks because it's not as safe to go. And then going that often reduces the chances of them getting fresh food. getting that connection with the farm, or maybe they don't have a car. So those are disadvantaged type of things that make it more difficult. I'm not saying that this is not necessary. I mean, that these trends actually kind of give us a vision of what could it be. But it's also interesting to think about it that way. That's on one side. And the other thing is also this idea that so much of what we do as social interactions are around food. Like even myself, if I want to have a meeting, I always want to put food in front of me. Like, let's have a coffee. Let's have a donut. Let's have an apple. So like our social interactions are also highly mediated by the choices of food. And sometimes I think to myself, and I have small kids myself, is that why do we need food as an excuse to have a positive social interaction? So that's something also to think. So I'll stop
just
there
wanted
so
to,
everyone can participate.
yeah, and I also wanted to just draw attention to some of the things that came up in the chat. Claudette Gordon was talking a little bit about some of the individual choices she made around helping herself with being an asthmatic, and a vegetable garden and a focus on eating natural foods has made a difference. Julissa talks a little bit about restaurants and wondering how they're going to survive now that people are prepping more meals in their home. And then Kate Birch has kind of expanded on Dr. Roldo's comment and noted how people like Barbara and other authors don't really present a realistic approach to eating for most people. And there's the issue of systemic racism, which has impacted who can participate actively in the food system and who can't.
Those are all great points. And yeah, the book doesn't always give you the answers. I'm not sure if that's I mean, there's some things, like the trickle down effect that Dan Barber hopes came, when he wrote the book. But like I've tried to show that he's changing too. But there's no clear answers, and things like trickle down food ways could be taken offensively, and is that a real thing? Does that work? But those are all really great points and important to keep in mind as we actually try to change the food system. The school food system in New York City is the second biggest purchaser of food behind the military. So what we do here in the city is part of that conversation. It's a major part of that conversation. And we need to take into account those, all the different voices that are out there and all the issues, because if we want to create a new food system, which should be a part of our culture, which should be maybe connected to a cuisine, everyone needs to come along for the ride. And you'll see in the book that the food systems that Dan Barber goes and he visits and he sees are part and are interwoven with the society. So we all have to kind of go together with this. And it is important to understand who might not be able to, who doesn't have the privilege to access these foodways, who can't go to the farmer's market and afford that. And what farmers can always attend the farmer's market or not. So yeah, those bring up more issues and questions.
Can I interrupt or could I add, Craig?
Yeah, please.
So Maria Isabel brought up some great points, Kate too, and the comments on how people have changed some of their eatings. And you were part of this too, Craig, last Wednesday when we went to the Botanical Garden in the Bronx, that the Edible Academy, all the food that was planted to be harvested in the spring, all of a sudden had no audience to pick and to cook, right? They lost all the school trips, all the, most of the volunteers, people were laid off. Most of that food went to pots, part of the solution in the Bronx on Webster Avenue, which then distributed fresh food to the community. So it's one way that at least it's not what we know, Dan Barber is kind of high end and Mark Bittman, but these were solutions that said, okay, what are we going to do with all this food? Let's give it to communities that could use it right away, right? And then it also went to another group, and I know that an acronym, but Mexican Association in the South Bronx, like around 149th Street. I have to look it up. But anyway, people are thinking in these ways. And then there was another conference I attended for the Westchester Rockland Dietetic Association, and in neighborhoods, communities are stepping up too, asking for money where they get gift cards and they give out to community members that don't have access to food. And there was one's called Nourish All, and another great organization, a community house that serves mostly Hispanic, Latino families, where they come in and they can socialize in a safe environment, and they prepare foods that are culturally familiar and nurture more specifically the aging population. So I just wanted to point out that there are in our local environments right here, trying to fill these gaps in feeding people, and not just canned food. I'm talking fresh food, for most fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, that's great to point out. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Again, so as a newbie, if you may, to the area, I appreciate, also the introduction to many of those great organizations. I wanted to, kind of share something also that I was thinking, not only about, fresh food, but also behavior about communities, that I know of, that maybe I haven't seen it in the US, but I've seen it abroad in global health initiatives that have to do with healthy eating. Because one thing is when you bring food to communities, and it may be a one-time thing, it may be sustained, but it not necessarily translate into changing behaviors within the home and changing behaviors in individuals. And unfortunately, they happen often so that people don't change. They say, well, the food drive is around the corner every Tuesday, and every Tuesday the food drive make conscious decisions, sometimes led by great people who said this is what it should be in the bag, and it's healthy and it's fresh, and but it's not necessarily linked to making changes in behavior. And changing behavior is a tough thing. I remember when First Lady Michelle Obama said, we're going to reduce obesity. And I thought to myself, that is crazy. That is the most difficult thing to do, because that is changing people's behavior about food and exercise. That is the hardest thing to do. But that set aside, is community kitchens. So I've seen this in the most poor settings around the world, Latin America specifically, that are very successful in creating these behaviors about healthy eating. And when I mean, this is like the most disadvantaged group that you can hit, marginal, almost rural communities that live in the outskirts of big cities. They do it in Africa as well, where they bring the knowledge about new types of food, the importance of nutrition, the importance of giving nutrition to young children to prevent stunning. So it goes down the trail of not only providing food, but also saving children's lives in terms of nutrition and preventing stunning children as they move forward, which is, from the economic point of view, critically important before they turn 5 years of age. But when they bring this knowledge to these, and most of them are women, of course, this knowledge to the community kitchens, they bring the food to almost like these communal kitchens and tents, and they're responsible to really feed the whole community. And the reason that this happens this way is because many of the houses in particular don't have refrigerators. So having it almost comes down to a couple of refrigerators or a couple of cooking supplies and elements to a community. It's like 2 to 3 per neighborhood, if you may, or village or community. And they're very successful in not only bringing these new practices of what is good to eat, but also what is nutritious to eat to influence the nutrition of the children. I don't know if that has an implication with My son is here. My apologies. My son almost has a PhD by now. He goes to so many meetings that at 5 years of age, he's very knowledgeable. That are successful. I don't know if it has an urban application, to my knowledge, but it's certainly something to think about.
Yeah, those are great points, and those ways that we promote healthy foods throughout society, especially where they're needed most. To go back to the chef, people like Jose Andres, his World Kitchen organization. I think that there's a movement, a sea change in the way that chefs consider food and what their role is, and that is definitely something that's a big theme in the book. What's the role of the chef? Not just catering to the high end community. It's like they are the arbiters of taste. I think Dan Barber calls it. They are the way that real change can possibly be potentially be made. They bring food. They make it into more than just the mundane, which hopefully is a way to transform the system. So it is relevant, and the chefs are involved in activities like that to help feeding really resource deprived areas and people who need help, and hopefully elevating their consideration of what food is and how they should be eating, because the American food system, that's an export that we've foisted onto the world, and so we're trying to reel it back in a little bit maybe, and hopefully export something a little bit better now.
Yes, and I just wanted to bring up something that was in the chat. Claudette Gordon talked about specifically the faith community's role in also feeding and supporting communities at this time.
Yeah, and there's some good things happening too. The Nobel Peace Prize went to the World Food Program. So that's saying something. That's not something that happens every year. So things are happening and things are changing. Things are happening really quick. I mean, this is how usually it happens. All of a sudden, all these things that we've been speaking about for many years, and it's been stagnant. And maybe the pandemic has pried loose a lot of that are happening. So it's nice that the Nobel Committee wanted to award that prize to the World Food Program. I think it's an important award, and I think it's connected to what we're speaking about. So we got into that a little bit. So this is just a little bit about Stone Barns, where Dan Barber works, and it's a working farm that's also a food hub. And again, the farm to table. That movement was, the initial element of this, but it's changing, as we're also pointing out. And so this is how Dan Barber, in the last administration, when things were much different, he was part of that, that the council and the big push to change our lifestyle habits and our eating habits, and the Rockefeller Report issued a report during the pandemic called Reset the Table, which Jay sent over to me, which was really interesting. And it's a way to kind of tackle our challenges in the food system. I encourage everyone to find that report, Resetting the Table. But part of this, of that plan that Michelle Obama launched towards children, reduced obesity by 500,000 people, and that the report shows that, which was amazing. I couldn't even believe it when I read it. So the leadership from political people in power, especially when they are shown maybe a potentially better way of lifestyle changes, of eating habit changes, can potentially make a massive impact and change things really quickly. 500,000 people, children, reduce their obesity levels. So it's nothing to just ignore. It's something to promote and understand the potential power of that. And Dan Barber is obviously like concerned about this, and he wants to be part of the solution. Not to bring up POTS again, but so this was the way Blue Hill went. This was the last iteration of their menu. He wanted to change. Dan Barber wanted to change the way the menu was constructed, instead of dishes to what's available in the environment in the season that it's in. So we're in October, and there would be a list of what the environment provides, and on a day-to-day, the menu items would change, and that's part of his third plate. And that was part of the issue with the farm to table movement, in his opinion, and we'll see some of the quotes. But cherry picking ingredients, heirloom, specialty ingredients that might be out of the reach of a lot of people. So even though dining at Blue Hill might be beyond what most of us can afford and participate in, looking at the system like this is maybe something that is possible. In places like Grow NYC and things that are happening in New York City, maybe allow us to participate in a system like this that might have, might be a path to get out of that conventional system, the industrial agricultural system that's causing so many problems, including the pandemic that we're in the middle of right now. So here's just something I was curious about, and if anyone wants to share. And again, there's that famous quote. But do you eat or do you feed? And is there a difference? And if anyone wants to comment on that, like, how do you interact with your food? Is it just about getting calories into your system and just filling your belly? Or is it more of an act of cultural identity, of savoring flavor, of is it bigger than just feeding? And if you have something to share, please do.
Hi, Chantal again. So it's really interesting. I started recently. I joined this program. It's pretty much with a bunch of famous people offering quote unquote classes, but it's I think I consider it more like a famous people YouTube. It's master's class. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it, but they offered a special for students. As long as you had a school email, you were able to enroll for $1 for a whole year. So one of the classes that they offer were chefs, and the popular one was Gordon Ramsay. And in the beginning, instead of just beginning to cook, he discusses on the importance of food and breaking it down. And I was I was pretty fascinated. He was pretty much emphasizing, like, food is something you're supposed to feel, not just, you're not just supposed to eat it. You're supposed to feel and understand where this food is coming from. And one of the main example was baby carrots. If it was freshly picked, he discussed, he's like, you're not supposed to, cut the ends, cut the nerves. He's like, you can use the leaves for a salad. You can, he's like, you don't even have to cut the baby carrots. He's like, if it's freshly picked, you can just brush it off. He's like, since you're cooking it correctly, there's no reason why, and you're obtaining more nutrients from the carrots. And I was just like, oh my God, this is such a respectable view of seeing food that I didn't really comprehend. But yeah, no, definitely he's giving me a different perspective. I'm like, wow, I'm really supposed to feel the food I'm eating. So I'm definitely having a different approach on my relationship with food. But yeah, that's just a great connection.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. That's exactly what I was thinking too. So this is Dan Barber's childhood farm in the Berkshires, and so that goes back to children. If you reach children with food at an early age and maybe a deeper appreciation for it, and we could do that through public venues, hopefully, maybe, especially the New York City school system. like they do in other countries. Maybe this is like the best approach to change some of those habits before they even start. And so if anyone wants to comment about that and children and eating, this is maybe where you can share what you think about that. And here's Stone Barns. It's a beautiful place. And so this is the way it used to go. When you go to Stone Barns, you spend a lot of money and you sit there and it's a whole presentation. And it kind of made me think that it's not really a restaurant at all. It's an experience that is meant for the participants to share with other people. So not a normal restaurant, different agenda. Here's some of the dishes that you could look at. Not normal dishes. They're stories, really. They're communicating something else besides just eating. And I know that some people in the audience have left Stone Barns kind of hungry. So maybe intellectually full, and that was the point. But that's kind of what is going on inside Blue Hill at Stone Barns. And so we can get into some of the excerpts of the book and see where that takes us, unless someone wants to share anything that we've already touched on, spoken about, is just feeling like they want to communicate anything. Please share. I can't see the chat box, so if someone could be my eyes there. So one of the themes of the book is flavor. Dan Barber, as a chef, is obsessed with flavor. And I don't know, in the book also, it states that Americans have lost the sense of flavor and what that means. And there's even a very kind of metaphysical almost discussion of the sub-threshold of taste. But this is one of the main themes. This is the driving energy of Dan Barber in this book is flavor, and tasting something for the first time. He worked for Alice Waters at Chez Panisse, a very famous kind of an initial farm to table restaurant in the U.S. And he talks about how he ate a peach for the first time and really tasted the peach. And how the food that we eat has been modified, for maximum sweetness, to be ready at a certain time and to ripen during the travel of the food. So this is a driving element. And I never thought so much about flavor itself, but this is the driving energy behind what Dan Barber is doing in this book. So if anyone has anything to say about flavor and the taste of food, or how we lose it, or how we don't even think about it, or anything along those lines, that's a major element of the book. So he's assuming that you also, as a reader of this book, appreciate flavor as as the gravity around your eating habits, which may or may not be true depending on who you are and where you're coming from. Farm to table represents the second plate in his third plate philosophy. So I briefly mentioned how the cherry picking of food might be an issue with farm to table. So it's he's rethinking his whole farm to table movement, which is the whole essence of the restaurant that he was managing. And so I think a great point of this book is that self reevaluation, the ability to change, how you approach things in the past. It's a refreshing, especially from a person, with authority and potentially a lot of wisdom built up over the years, to be able to kind of reevaluate and rethink things you believe in and challenge yourself. And so, like we're talking about challenging, like what's the how do we think about the rest of society when we, not just about feeding ourselves, how are we feeding everyone around us? How are we feeding our society? So that's a really good, important, politically relevant way of eating, is to thinking about the rest of society and how we could bring them along, and how we could, break bread with everyone, and share with everyone, give an appreciation to everybody. And so this book also, what you get if you read it is a lot of history, a lot of potted, very brief but relevant, detail oriented, nuanced, like understanding of like how we got to where we got, and what the pitfalls of the agricultural system is. And so you talk about bloated animal feedlots here, and Barber monocultures. He brings up all these things, and this quote actually is, it's not a fait accompli. We can change this thing. Things that seem like they were fixtures in our life, that could potentially lead to a dystopia, like the 18th century factories. We can change these things. Not that we've fully perfected, our economic system, not even close. But so there's hope that we could change things. We're not set. This is not a destiny. And especially with this pandemic, the bloated animal feedlots, ethics, that's kind of where I come into it. It's just unethical to treat other sentient beings like that. That's my own personal feeling. And that's not something that the third plate assumes, that it's okay to eat animals as long as you treat them right. And I'm not sure that I agree with that, but that's my personal feeling. But these things are breeding grounds for things that could, wipe out populations. So if the health aspect didn't get you, or the ethical part didn't get you, the fact that there's lethal things brewing in our current agricultural system, that might raise some alarms. And there's something called the Overton Window. And so that's important. That's like, what can you change? The window of political making changes, where you can get the mass of people are ready to make a change, or are ready to, vote for politicians who can change the laws and break up big agribusiness. That window is probably opening right now. So if anyone wants to comment on the political aspects of changing the agricultural system, if anyone has deeper knowledge, there's a lot of people in the audience that are more versed than me in this. I would love to hear what you have to say about the political opportunities that we have now to come together and demand change, to take the political energies that are happening right now and apply them to transforming the system. The window might be open. So. And so the book discusses the farm to table movement a lot, and it's not all bad. A lot of it is the seasonality of things, and getting things locally and supporting your local farmer, who hopefully is doing things right by the land, and the biodiversity in the land, and working with nature. So we don't want to throw the whole thing away. It's nuance is what Dan Barber argues for in this book, I think, and that's part of his transformation.
Craig, I wanted to, there's something in the chat I wanted to bring out. Kate Bird is talking about the ag subsidies, and she notes that the problem with ag subsidies is that they're wrapped into the Farm Bill along with SNAP. And those are two issues that Dems and Republicans clash on and use to bargain against each other at each revision.
Definitely. and this last administration in 2018, before any of this was going on, there was a plan to cut SNAP in half by utilizing a farm, sending, like a CSA box to people at their homes, all the SNAP recipients. And so that sounds good. We're going to get food to people from farms to their home. How great. But you have to be very careful when political legislative decisions like that are going on, because there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that you don't want to take for face value. So depriving people of an EBT card so that they can make their own decisions about where they're getting their food, which is the way the current system works, which feeds a ton of people, and which originated to help farmers get their product to the people more efficiently, was being manipulated in 2018. This was happening, and the whole goal was to cut the benefits, and it totally didn't take into account, getting a food box to a person in maybe an area where they're not home a lot. How do you protect the food box from getting stolen? So that was an article that I was going to put on there, but there's so many different offshoots you can go down with this conversation. But it's a great point. I mean, it is something that we should watch closely, these negotiations, and put politicians in place that seem to care about, and understand what's going on, instead of being shills for large organizations. And it takes legwork. You have to read up on these politicians. You have to get involved politically. It is something that you don't want to ignore. So yeah, excellent point, and really important. So this is what Dan Barber says about Dr. Roldos.
So I wanted to say something about that, because when I was at NIH, I was part of the policy team related to minority health disparities. And we often were tasked with what is called congressional justifications, which is write-ups that had to justify why NIH needed money for minority health and health disparities. And we would write up everything that we needed. So that was one part of what we had to do. But another part were responses to congressmen and Senate that wanted to know what we do. So Elizabeth Warren asking NIH or the Department of Human Health Services, saying, what have you funded related to Crohn's disease? And then we would have to, look our portfolio of grants and scientists and say, we are funding these scientists. So what you just said is critically important when we have a social justice or a topic related to health and population health, is to have these bridges with champions. I'm going to use the word champions, who actually want to take these things on. And I think that Barter is a champion. He's not a politician, but he has influence. And he is a champion in his field. He's a champion just like Jose Andres, who was, has brought so much attention. You may recall when the hurricanes hit Puerto Rico, he fed like 2 million people in a period of like 2 weeks, like shifting everything that he had to his foundation to provide food to those that suffer from the Hurricane Maria, I think. No, it wasn't Maria, it was the previous one in the island. And he has done that repeatedly around the world. So I do think that they're champions, and I do think that there's a great importance of us that are working with communities that, that understand these topics from a scientific point of view, with an analytical point, perspective of how we can work with communities to reach out to champions, to reach out to policymakers, so that the problem is that it takes a long time to come around, and it takes a lot of patience, because we want things for tomorrow. But the truth of reality is that policy takes time. So even if we made a point with our congressman or with the congressman of, our Senate representative in whatever topic we want, even if we get their support and he or she goes around and requests, any aspect of the federal government or their state to give a response of what they're doing, it takes time. And then it has to come around, and then it comes around in the different cycle. But even though with all that burdensome, I think it's worthwhile.
Yes. Great point. So this is just more about the power of the chef. Something the book assumes that you think is relevant. The ability for chefs, and this is how he defends that, to change how we view different ingredients. And so the third plate, when he speaks about the sea, and there's a lot of interesting discussions with environmental conservationists and people that are using interesting ways that have been used for centuries of fishing. There's a way to transform how we eat, eating bycatch, things that are just wasted, thrown back into the water because people are looking for the best fish. And in this case, it's Dan Barber brings in Carl Safina, who is a ocean conservationist, and the whole bluefin tuna and the controversy of eating that in Spain. There's an age-old way of bluefin fishing, and Dan Barber put bluefin tuna on the plate, which really kind of ruffled a lot of feathers, including Carl Safina's. You shouldn't eat bluefish at all. But the people of Cadiz in Spain, they've been depending on this food forever. And so there's a lot of reports. The Eat Lancet report that Walter Willett, who's a researcher at Harvard, so that's an interesting report in the age of the Anthropocene, where humans are having such an impact on the environment. You can't just force certain communities to change what they're doing if they're dependent on food sources, including meat. And I think that's an interesting aspect of this, is to be compassionate and to be understanding, and to realize that some people, like what you're saying, with the political system, things take time to change, and to be understanding and not to be forceful, and speak down to people, and to make to kind of force them out of the conversation, but to be inclusive. And so the power of the chef again is there, and so that was an interesting part of the book. The whole bluefin tuna and the way that it's being fished in Spain, and how in our society it's the environmentalists are trying to protect this fish because it's been way overfished, almost to the point of disappearance, which is what we're doing to a lot of things in the sea. And I always hear that eating fish, that's I don't eat meat, I don't eat chicken, but I eat fish, as if it's there's no impact to it. So it just shows how you need to wrestle with what people are eating, and people need to think more about what they're eating, and we need to have conversations instead of making demands. And so if anyone has anything to say about that, I thought that was it was it really drew my attention, that part of the book, the friction that goes on, and the dialogue that happens in the book is refreshing too. And no one got up and walked away from each other, but they opened dialogues, and the communication, and education. And that's kind of also going all the way back to COVID, and what's happening to the destruction of the environment. Instead of creating just laws that make illegal the destruction of habitats, to communicate with these people who are depending on these ecosystems, just to it's unfortunate, the capitalist system, that people are forced into doing this just to stay alive, but to educate, and to communicate with them, and to show what they're doing is having certain effects, and the fact that we need to spend money in wealthy areas to protect the habitat, kind of like the old system of paying farmers not to farm sometimes, just to let the land alone. So what I've read is that we need to at least leave 50% of habitable environment just left alone, not to touch it. And we probably have to pay for that. If we have the wealth, that wealth needs to be directed to supporting people so that they could survive without having to log and mine and and all those other human activities that are causing damage, and farm. So if anyone has any thoughts about that, the book is full of thinking about things like that, and conservation.
So Craig, this is Andrea, and I just wanted to mention something that's a little bit curious in what in reference to what you're talking about. In Mexico, there is this fish called the lionfish, which is reproducing relatively unchecked and destroying native populations of fish. And so what they're trying to do is serve it as an edible fish. And there is one particular place where they were making it a feature of their menu that we serve lionfish. And here it was made as if you eat this fish, you are doing a good deed. So, you know, sort of on the flip side of what you're talking about, we're being encouraged to eat certain polluting fish, or I don't know what you would call it, in order to preserve the environment. What's that?
Yeah.
And I just thought that sort of an interesting contrast to what you're talking about.
It goes right along with it, actually. Eating the bycatch, the stuff that people, and a great point. And I looked it up, and there's a whole menu of invasive species, and the lionfish is on there.
Yes.
But if you look that up, invasive species that we can eat, there's a whole menu of these items. And so, you know, I try not to eat. I try to be plant-based as much as possible. But if you can help the environment by consuming invasive species,
it also economically supports people to catch them. So that by eating them and paying money to stores that are carrying this fish, you are sort of supporting the removal of the fish from the environment. I don't know if it makes a dent, but the idea is there.
Yeah, yep, that is a great point. And people are putting these animals on the menu, and I hope that goes somewhere, and I hope they're doing it responsibly. And you know, maybe we could eat kudzu. Maybe kudzu could be featured in side dishes everywhere. There's nutrition there.
Even the Japanese knotweed, which is an invasive species, is supposedly edible.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, I can't remember the compound in red wine, but it's in there.
Resveratrol.
That's in kudzu, the knotweed. They use that in supplements, actually.
Resveratrol.
Yeah, that's. Yeah.
So I'm actually
too,
I'm just mindful of the time. We have about 5 minutes, so I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to wrap up. And Craig or others, if you had some final thoughts about, I guess, just what's the takeaway from this book? I mean, it's I think it was published in 2014, so it's not really recent, but what are some of the things that we might be able to use as we think about the food system right now?
So my takeaway, and there's a concept that Barbara mentions, I'm not sure if I said it, but the farm manager at Stone Barns has an approach to the environment. Jack Algier is his name, that E.O. Wilson, he called this biophilia. So it's an understanding that we are part of the environment and we have an effect, and we can't separate ourselves out of it, which is what we've been doing. So I think that's another kind of underlying theme through all this. And if you read this book, you'll start thinking like that. And so I thought, first of all, I thought I've heard this before. And I have the Gaia hypothesis of how humans are, part of nature, and we're having an interaction with nature, and the more we violate it, the more we're going to pay for it. And I think that we are discovering that right now. So yeah, we only got to the tip of the iceberg here, but at the end of this talk, I kind of wanted to bring it back to, okay, so we're in the city. So we're already removed from nature in a sense. So we have some elements that are up against us that remove us from the natural world. And James Lovelock and his theory, the Gaia hypothesis, he comments on that. And so this is where I was going to end. And it talks about what might be, part of our psychology in the city, how we can get so separated from the natural world, which is, it is turned into the disaster that we are facing right now in a way. That we can control things, that we can manipulate everything. We are the masters of nature. So I thought of this as a kind of giving us an understanding of ourselves to look inward. Why the city and the surrounding areas that support the food system of the city, why we might have spread apart and become separated. And then I wanted to, talk about all of the things that are happening, at least in the Bronx and all around the city, in urban areas. It's going on everywhere. So you see all these icons here are all the different urban farms and gardens that are all around us in the city area. So I would say, find your local farm or urban garden, and start and read and try to read the book, because besides being involved in local growing, you'll take things that Barber encounters in his book and you'll start to apply it everywhere. You'll apply it to the political system. You'll apply it to the growing system and what you're eating and what you're doing. I think no matter who you are. And so there's a lot of stuff going on that we should look for. And if you want to see some of this and see interesting things like people reintroducing crops and plants that are not local to here, but are from their home, wherever they came from, overseas or from different countries, you can watch these Bronx food and farm tours that you were able to go on these things like in person at one point. But if you go to the New York Botanical Garden, which is the home of the Bronx Green Up, you could see some of these farms. You could watch them on YouTube. You could watch these videos, and you could take elements of what Dan Barber's able to do because of his where he is and his access to resources, going overseas, stuff that you might not be able to do, and you could turn it around and see what's in our local backyard, and start to see what you can change from the ground up here. It takes some of the high cuisine and maybe introduce that into your local community. It shouldn't be the privy of the wealthy that they can eat like that. I mean, a lot of these foods were peasant foods to begin with. So to kind of reclaim that tradition and using growing systems in our backyards would be something that you could start with. Whether or not that can support 1.5 million people in the Bronx, that's a different question. But there's a lot of amazing areas in New York. Orange County is the home to black dirt, which is something the book talks about, a glacial deposit of earth that's really rich in the Hudson Valley and the Finger Lakes. People are growing wheat again. And Grow NYC, if you go onto their site, there is a ton of stuff being grown in New York. So you don't have to go overseas. You don't have to go to these different systems far away. There's a lot of stuff going on in our area. And so empowering yourself with some of the things that Dan Barber, how he sees the world through his lens in your own community, and becoming, developing some culinary expertise, using all the free resources that are out there, and bringing that to people that might not know about it or have encountered it is something that is maybe something an action path that we could take to make this all more relevant than just psychological or intellectual food. So that's where I was going to end up, and there's a lot of stuff in this book. It's 450 pages of adventures in food and culinary and agricultural history. So it's a lot, and it's hard to cover in an hour and a half, but I think we even got beyond the book. I think we did the book justice, and it was fun and interesting, and everyone really I learned from you guys too. So
Thank you so much, Craig, for taking the time to walk us through the book and some key ideas. Dr. Roldos, thank you as well for helping us frame the conversation in a different way, looking more systemically. And I appreciate everyone who contributed and came to this event. We'll be having more of these, so look out. I put in the chat a survey for everyone to complete. If you could do that, just to let us know what you think and what type of things you might be interested in having us sponsor next. So thank you so much for taking the time to come.
And
Good to
thank
see
you, Jane, for all the organization and for envisioning this process. Thank you all.
Thanks. Thank you. Have a good day.